We all know about that one outlaw, Harry Taco Bowman. Today, I am going to tell you the story of Bowman becoming the most infamous drug lord in the history of the Outlaw MC. Bowman succeeded Harry Henderson as Outlaws International President after his mentor resigned due to ongoing legal issues, and he was appointed the club's leader at a summit in Joliet, Illinois, in February 1984. He relocated the Outlaws' international headquarters from Chicago to Detroit and conducted his presidential activities from the Detroit chapter's fortified clubhouse on Warren Avenue, overseeing various matters, from setting the club's policies regarding rival motorcycle gangs to monitoring the activities of members. Upon his ascendancy to the Outlaws' presidency, Bowman moved to the affluent Detroit suburb of Grosse Pointe Farms, where he lived with his wife and 3 children, and enrolled his daughters, Kelly, Kristen, and Courtney, in expensive local private schools. Eschewing the stereotypical long-haired, bearded biker image, he was generally clean-shaven, sporting neatly coiffed hair, and was known to wear expensive suits. Bowman traveled in a custom-made, armor-plated Cadillac and was usually accompanied by at least one armed bodyguard. Bowman developed a reputation as a formidable, ruthless, and inventive, but discreet crime boss. He was dead set against publicity for himself or his club. Law enforcement described Bowman as the first businessman biker boss and credited him with pioneering the Outlaws' foray into more sophisticated rackets and diverse business ventures beyond traditional motorcycle gang fronts, such as bars, strip clubs, and tattoo parlors. One key policy decision of his was to augment the club's drug and prostitution operations with gambling, loan sharking, and extortion. Bowman forged ties with Italian and Eastern European crime groups, as well as influential members of legitimate society, including philanthropists, politicians, judges, and policemen. He also built a sophisticated counterintelligence network by having Outlaws members collect search warrant affidavits and newspaper clippings that provided details on law enforcement efforts against the club and attend trials to gather information on witnesses against the Outlaws. In 1988, Bowman met with Hells Angels leaders to negotiate safe routes for members of both clubs to attend the federal courthouse in Louisville, Kentucky, where 10 Hells Angels members were standing trial, accused of conspiring to bomb the Outlaws' clubhouse in the Portland neighborhood of Louisville. During the negotiations, Bowman learned that Raymond Bear Chaffin, a former outlaw and member of the Warlocks in Central Florida, had been contacting the Hells Angels in an attempt to merge the Warlocks with the Angels. Over the course of several meetings with Detroit partnership boss Jack Taco in 1989, Bowman established an alliance with the Mafia. In 1979, Jack Taco assumed leadership of the Detroit partnership following the death of Joseph Zerilli. Taco inherited a decimated organization with several key members facing prison. Taco also lost a valuable resource with the death of Papa John Priciola, one of the last original ruling dons from the partnership's inception in 1931. Around this time, Jack's cousin Anthony Zerilli was released from prison. While many expected trouble between them, Tony found himself in legal troubles after being recorded bragging to a Federal Bureau of Investigation informant about his activities in Las Vegas. This triggered a federal investigation into the Detroit family's interest in the Aladdin Hotel and Casino, which was being operated by convicted bank robber James Tamer. On March 15, 1996, Jack and 16 alleged partnership members or associates were arrested. The government sought a forfeiture for proceeds derived from the defendants' respective alleged crimes, claiming that Taco and 4 co-defendants were jointly and severally liable for $234,700 that had been collected in street tax extortions. The government further claimed that Jack Taco, Anthony Corrado, and Vito Giacalone, in addition to the $234,700 amount, were jointly and severally liable for $4.2 million in profits from the sale of 2 hotels in Las Vegas, the Frontier Hotel and the Edgewater Hotel, $1 million extorted from Sal Vitello, and $38,400 in proceeds from the collection of unlawful gambling debts. Thus, the government sought a total forfeiture amount of $5,473,100. The district court concluded that the evidence presented by the government at trial did not provide, by a preponderance of the evidence, a sufficiently quantified factual basis for assessing any forfeiture against the defendants. Prosecutors suffered another blow when Tony Zerilli and Tony Giacalone extended their trials indefinitely due to illness. The 5 defendants were charged, along with 12 other defendants, in a 25-count indictment relating to their alleged involvement in the Detroit branch of the national mafia organization known as La Cosa Nostra. Jack Taco and Anthony Corrado were convicted on 2 counts of conspiracy under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, one based on a pattern of racketeering activity and one based upon the collection of unlawful debts, and on 1 count of a Hobbs Act conspiracy. Paul Corrado and Novi Tocco were convicted of the RICO pattern of racketeering activity conspiracy and the Hobbs Act conspiracy. Vito Giacalone pleaded guilty to the RICO collection of unlawful debts conspiracy. During sentencing, Jack Taco was supported by several high-profile community figures, including former Detroit Tigers manager Sparky Anderson, ex-Warren Mayor Ronald Bonkowski, political fundraiser Frank Stella, Tigers advertising agent Gary Vito, members of the Kilgore family, Grosse Pointe City Councilman Patrick Petz, and a host of restaurant owners, retired judges, doctors, lawyers, and priests. On November 13, 1998, Judge John Corbett O'Mara sentenced Taco to a year or less in a halfway house, with stipulations that he could conduct family businesses daily and return to the facility at night. However, prosecutors demanded prison time, and on December 23, 1998, Taco was resentenced to a year at the Federal Medical Facility in Rochester, Minnesota. His sentence was reduced for good behavior, and he was released in 1999 after serving nearly 11 months. Still, prosecutors appealed Judge O'Mara's sentence, claiming it was below minimum sentencing requirements. On January 5, 2000, the U.S. Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the judge who sentenced Taco originally was too lenient in his sentence. Prosecutors arranged a deal with Taco's cousin, Nove, who was incarcerated on extortion charges. Nove agreed to testify against Jack Taco, as long as he did not have to testify against his uncle Tony Zerilli, whom he considered a mentor. However, there was a problem with Nova's testimony. He was forced to admit that he never received direct orders from Jack Taco, allowing him to engage in the extortion activities that resulted in his original conviction. Nove was compelled to admit that his extortion of bookmakers was what had initially got him into trouble with brothers Jack and Tony Taco. With prosecutors facing a situation potentially disastrous to their credibility, Taco was resentenced to 34 months with credit for 1 year and 1 day served, making him eligible for early release. On November 21, 2001, Taco was released from federal prison. As part of the coalition, the Outlaws partnered with the Detroit mob in loan sharking, gambling operations, and narcotics deals. Outlaws members and mobsters began collaborating in rackets, which were operated from a series of biker bars in Metro Detroit. In 1991, Bowman and the Outlaws caused a dispute with the Detroit partnership after the bikers began extorting Lebanese racketeers who were running a string of floating craps games and who had traditionally paid protection money to the mafia in order to operate without interference. When the dice game organizers opted to pay the Outlaws instead, the mafioso Jackie the Kid, Giacalone, responded by assigning enforcers Paul, Big Paulie, Corrado, and Novi Tocco to murder Bowman. Unable to eliminate their target, Corrado and Tocco grew frustrated and suspicious about Giacalone's motives behind the would-be assassination. After Tocco sought counsel from other mafiosi, including his father Paul, brother Joe, and uncle Anthony Tony Z. Zerilli, the underboss of the Detroit Mafia, a conversation in which he and Corrado mused over the murder plot as they drove by Bowman's home on the morning of April 23, 1991, was intercepted by an FBI listening device planted in Tocco's car. After convincing Bowman that he wasn't being lured into a trap by the FBI, Federal agents met with Bowman in a parking lot on the east side of Detroit to warn him of the threat to his life. According to testimony from Nova Taco, who later turned government witness after a federal racketeering conviction, he and Corrado were prevented from carrying out the murder by Jack Taco after they presented their plan to kill Bowman to Paul Corrado's uncle Anthony, Tony the Bull Corrado, a capo regime. Bowman ultimately acquiesced his control of the gambling rackets, and the contract on his life was rescinded after Frank Bomarito brokered a sit-down between Bowman and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, the Detroit mob's street boss and uncle of Jack Giacalone. The Mafia, in turn, began sharing with the Outlaws an increased percentage of the profits from drug and loan sharking rackets in which the mob and the bikers colluded.